A real partner. Okay.
Hi, my name is Natasha Anstey. As Ray said, I graduated from Barnard in 2014. I had the pleasure of working in her lab to complete my thesis in the last 2 years of my college experience. And I want to talk to you all about how I got to this point in my life. When Ray gave me a call on Saturday morning, I was really shocked to be able to come back to you and offer you advice, because I really still feel like I'm finding my way. So I hope that what I have for you today is helpful, and please, I want to make this about what you all need. So if you have any questions, I'm going to try and keep my conversation a little bit shorter, so that and then I'm going to open the floor up. So please ask me questions at the end. So I think that there were a few questions that really spoke to me from the list that Ray had emailed me. One of them was, what is my day-to-day life in medical school like? Because I didn't know when I was sitting where you are what medical school was. I assumed it was an extension of college, and that's really not the case. It feels very different than my undergraduate experience. So I want to share that with you a little bit. And then I also want to talk about how Barnard and my undergraduate career really shaped my career aspirations ahead of me, because I think that is something that I uniquely found at Barnard compared to my fellow medical student friends, and I want to share that experience with you too. Does that sound good? Okay. Whew. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened to me between 2014 and now. So I graduated from Barnard in 2014 with a neuroscience degree. I studied a little bit of Spanish, but I didn't end up minoring in Spanish. I just wanted to be able to feel comfortable with the language, and I didn't end up finishing my minor. So that was something that I did that I regret a little bit. I studied abroad in Dominican Republic in Santiago. I did public health there, so that was a piece that I took from there that's kind of informing the choices that I'm making now. And then after I graduated from college, I knew that I didn't want to go directly into medical school. I knew that I wanted to take some time off to do service. And around the time that I was making the decision about where I wanted to serve, there was a lot of conversation about voluntourism. Has anyone heard of voluntourism? Yeah, I'm sure you're familiar. So the idea that you sort of go to this place hoping to enrich that place and end up taking more for yourself than giving back to the community. And so I really wanted to be cognizant of my skills and what I could offer the community, and not sort of overreach in that way. So there were a lot of medical programs that I could have done. I could have spent a year in Honduras doing some sort of medical service in communities there, but I didn't really have any medical skills at that point. I was just finishing my undergrad doing neuro, and I didn't really feel like I had much to offer in that area. I had, however, spent a lot of my time teaching. In high school, I did Indian classical dance. That was my life, and I also taught in that time too. And so then when I came to college, I was an SI leader for bio for 3 years. I did some tutoring on the side for that, and I continued to teach dance. And so I felt like I had gained a little bit of those skills that I could then apply in service later. So I started looking in programs in education, which was very stressful for my parents, because that is not something that is relevant to the medical field. They were already nervous about me taking time off, because they thought, if I take time off, will I ever go back? So that was something that was very nervous for them, and I had a lot of conversations around why I wanted to take a break, and you all can ask me about that if that's something that you are curious about as well. But I knew that I wanted to, and so I had these conversations with them. It did put a strain on our relationship for a little bit, but I think in the end they sort of were able to see where I was coming from. So I did some time with Blue Engine after I graduated. Blue Engine is a tutoring program. Their model is team teaching, so they take 4 people, they put them in a classroom, you work on a team, and you sort of help kids learn. And I taught in a math classroom in the Bronx for 2 years. It was 2 of the best years of my life. There were points in that time where I was like, maybe I'll be a teacher instead of a doctor. So that was a huge part of my life. And I would highly suggest taking that time, because I learned so much about myself, and I also learned so much about the professional community. I have spent a lot of time working to better myself. As a student, that's all you do. You know, the hours that you put in as a student studying, writing papers, going through attending classes, all of that directly affects you and the people that you love. Working at a job on a team with other people, your hours and your effort affects other people, and you get to see that, for better or for worse. It's an added pressure, but it's also an added joy. And I think that is something that as doctors or any kind of professional in the future you're going to experience. So I think it's really important that before medical school you get a taste of what that is. So I took the 2 years, and during that time I applied for medical school. I took my MCAT in 2014 August, and then I spent the year applying, getting my letters of recommendation together. 2 years was the right time for me. In my second year I went to interviews, obviously did my application, all that stuff, and I ended up making the choice to go to SUNY Downstate in Brooklyn. It's a great school. I can answer specific questions about that if that's on anyone's radar at the moment. But yeah, so now I am there. And I am on average, of average age, so 24 is the average age to be there. There are definitely students who are younger than me, a lot of students who are older than me, and our lives have looked very different coming to this point, but now we are all under the same pressures of medical school. I want to go through what my average day looks like. In all honesty, it looks very different every single day. A lot of medical school is navigating resources. They really talk a lot about knowledge acquisition. Has anyone heard of that kind of buzz phrase, knowledge acquisition? So teaching people how to learn, or how to sort of navigate all of the information that is available to us in this day and age. And that is what medical school is like. You have your professors, you have the sort of recommended textbooks, and then you also have these very commercialized sort of test strategy resources like Kaplan, Pathoma is one, and you sort of have to pick and choose from where you're getting your information and sort of fit it into preparing for your board exams, which are in 2 years. So for me at Downstate, they have sort of integrated a lecture curriculum and a small group curriculum. So in the morning, I would have 1 or 2 lectures given by a PhD or an MD. The PhD lectures tend to be very sort of in-depth and dry, and the idea is you have to sort of navigate how much of that information is relevant for you as a future MD. So your step 1 exam, which is the exam you take at the end of 2 years, that is the exam that you are prepping for in the first 2 years. That is the end goal, that's the marathon that you're running. And so you have to sort of understand what you're gonna need from those PhD in-depth lectures to then apply to that board exam. So a lot of the time that I spend is sort of sifting through all of this awesome, interesting information to really figure out what is it that is feasible for me to remember and apply 2 years down the line. So I would sit in those 2 lectures, and then we have small group time. Small group time consists generally of a 12-person group in which we meet with once a week a clinical doctor, and then once a week with a PhD doctor. The way it works at Downstate is that we're given a case, and we're given bits and pieces of information about that case. Generally, how it starts is an actor or an actress comes in, or one of us acts as the patient, and one of us acts as the doctor, and you get to wear your white coat, and you get to interview that patient. A lot of it is spent sort of practicing skills of empathy, understanding how to coax information out of a patient that they may not feel as relevant or important, and sort of you making that decision about what is actually important. And so then we go through, we get a lot of lab stats, red blood cell count, hemoglobin count, all these different sort of things that I don't really know what that means yet. And my job is to then sort of go through and understand what that means. So we are presented with all of this information. We as a group decide, okay, this is well above our skill set. What questions do we need to ask and research, and then come back so that we can apply and sort of help our fictitious patient. And we go through and as a group decide that. We come up with a list of research questions, and then it's our job, our homework to collaborate on those research questions and come back and answer them. So those are like our small group sessions. We also have a 4-person small group session. That kind of looks like you get 4 cases, and those can be very dry in terms of very biochemistry of it, or you can get 4 patients who have different kinds of cancer. The one that we did last was about cancer, and so we got 4 patients who had different types of cancer, and we had to make a diagnosis based on their symptoms about what cancer they had, and then sort of understand like what was going on pathologically within their body. And so that kind of helps us understand what like the normal physiology is, and then what the pathology is, and we sort of integrate that. And the idea is that you get this information very hands-on, so you're sort of like very actively learning and discussing and having conversations, and I think it's an important part of like creating that like memory so that you can then again apply this knowledge to your board exams 2 years down the line, which is like always in the back of our minds in everything that we do. We have a histology lab that we go to like once or twice a week. We sit, no one uses like a microscope anymore. We get virtual slides on a computer, and we go through and we like identify different parts of the cells that we're working on. We recently did like histopathology, so we worked on specific like cancer cells within the colon. So that was something that we did very recently. We have standardized patient sort of interviews where you like meet with someone. A standardized patient is just like an actor or an actress who's been paid to be your patient. You go in and you again play the doctor and you interview them. You get like a full social history, HPI, current complaint, all of that stuff, and you go through. You get a family history, and you learn to ask the hard questions like, how much do you drink? Like, how many sexual partners do you have? Who do you live with? Do you feel safe in your environment? And those kinds of questions are important when you're a doctor, and they're really hard to ask. And so those are the skills that we practice during those times. The final thing that we have is a preceptorship. So in the first 2 years at downstate, at least, you don't really, you're not really in a clinical setting. You are in classes, but they want you to be in a clinical setting. Like, they want you to get like sort of a small glimpse of what that looks like. So you get to sort of decide what you're interested in, and then go out and you shadow a doctor once a week for a year and a half, and you get to see them in action, and not like, and they tell us, you know, like there are going to be certain things that you want to copy and you want to be like, and there are going to be certain like non-exemplars that you see too, and all of that is important. None of the situations that we are going to be in are going to be perfect, so it's important to sort of like experience that imperfection. For me, I was really, really interested in reproductive health, and that was something that I got from Barnard. So I took a few gender studies classes here. I was part of the Women's Leadership Retreat for a year, and then I helped organize that. And if that's not on your radar as a science student, it wasn't on mine really, but apply and go. It's a really exciting opportunity available for students at Barnard. It's called the Women's Leadership Retreat. Again, I can answer questions about that if anyone's interested. But I like really felt sort of like opened up to this idea of women's health, and I really wanted to have an impact on women's rights in the field that I was in, which is in medicine. So that for me was women's health. So at SUNY Downstate, I wrote in and I said, listen, I'm really interested in reproductive rights, and I'd be really appreciative if you could pair me up with an OB-GYN that was also involved in reproductive health. And they listened, which is really nice. And I am currently at the Women's Option Center at Kings County. It's an abortion clinic. It's one of the only abortion clinics in Brooklyn that does second trimester abortions as well as first trimester abortions, both elective and non-elective. And I'm working with a really amazing doctor who does a lot of work in terms of sort of like the social aspect of that and the political aspect of that. But really what she's fighting for every day is sort of destigmatize healthcare, sort of providing the service to women in a safe, non-judgmental way, which for me, that's something that I want to see for myself 10 years down the line. And so that for me is really exciting, spending that time there, especially, for example, after Tuesday's election, which was really hard. It was a really hard day. Sort of, I got to go in the next day, Wednesday, and work with these amazing doctors and see these patients who need these services that are really important, that don't always feel important. And so I think that for me is something that like I see as like I that's how I know that I'm exactly in the right place now, through like all of the stress of studying for your MCATs and getting that GPA and working really hard at your interviews and waiting for those acceptance emails. Man, that is so stressful. But now I feel like it was worth it because I'm here like doing something that is going to lead me to where I need to be a few years down the line. Whew, that was a lot of words. Does anyone have any questions for me? How am I doing on time? Am I okay?
Good. You have about 10 more minutes, and remember that the goal is to make a video rather than audience participation.
Okay. All right. So I think that I talked as much as I could about like a lot of the stuff on this paper. I know that there were some questions about loans and things like that. Should I like go into that a little bit? Does anyone want more detail on how I spend my day every day? Like I can literally walk you through like a physical day, but I don't know. Yes, I'm seeing nods in the back. Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time self-studying. I think that's how it's different for undergraduates than for medical school. I wake up in the morning, I set my own schedule. A lot of the resources that I use are online. I use a lot of the transcripts for lecture instead of actually going to lecture, which is something I never did at Barnard. I always went to class at Barnard. And I spend a lot of time making Anki cards. Anki is a great flashcard service, and they create a regimen for you so that you can sort of like have short-term recollection and long-term recollection of material. So I spend most of my time is spent making those flashcards and then sort of using the flashcards. I spend a lot of time not by myself per se, but it's a lot of sort of like I'm not really interacting with others outside of class. We like sort of sit in silence and study together because everyone goes very much at their own pace. You don't, at SUNY at least, there's not a lot of like assessments that count for grades like week by week. You just have one summatives week at the end of the unit. So you can really sort of work at your own pace. A lot of people take like the first half of the unit a little bit easier. That's kind of when I see my family and my friends on the weekends. I'll like try and go out for dinner during the week at those times. But really, I spend most of my time studying. I wasn't that great of a student at Barnard in terms of I wasn't as focused as I could have been at Barnard. Now I spend a lot of my time studying. It's a lot of work. So I'll go to class and I'll be in those various classes that I described to you. Each day is different, so I have to look at they provide us with a Google Calendar, and I'll say like, okay, this is the room I'm going to this today, and it's not very set in stone. You sort of have a lot of variability in that, but then after that I'm like done around 4:30, and then I'm sitting at my computer like making my flashcards, going through material, drawing glycolysis pathways, all that stuff. So, excuse me. So a lot of it is self-study. In terms of spending time with family and friends, again, like I said, I'm in an 11-week unit now, so the first 5 or 6 weeks is a little bit lighter. Like I went home and I celebrated Diwali with my family. I'm going to see a Broadway show tonight. And I did spend a weekend in Pennsylvania in a little cabin. So you get those pockets of fun, but now after this weekend, basically after today, I will go back into my little hermit crab shell. That's how my friends describe it. And I will study. The last 2 weeks before exams, I charged my phone once a week. So I was really disconnected. I was really sort of focused on what I was doing. Which for me is a relatively new experience. Again, like I said, at Barnard, I was a little bit more wayward of a student than I could have been. So yeah, and so that for me is is a change. But again, like I said, you sort of see very directly where your path is going, and that is a very, very good motivation to do hard work.
Could you talk a little bit about student loans and
yes.
how you're dealing with that? And maybe we'll throw it open to questions.
Yeah, I'm avoiding that topic a little bit because, to be honest, I'm not really dealing with student loans right now because I'm not paying them off, right? I'm in school, so they're in deferment. But I'll tell you a little bit about money management because I learned a lot about that in my 2 years of working. I worked at Blue Engine, which is an AmeriCorps program, so I worked in a stipend. The first year, I lived in New York City for under $12,000 a year, which is Not a lot of money, let me tell you, especially when $700 of those dollars every month was going to rent. So it was tough. Families do it here, so like we can too, definitely. It's done, but it's hard. I lived off food stamps for those 2 years. Excuse me. My voice is going. Actually, can I get some water? Is there water back there? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I learned a little bit about budgeting during that time. I'm sure you can imagine, I keep an Excel spreadsheet. I track every expense that I make. I make sure that sort of halfway into the month, I make sure that I'm on track, and if I'm not on track, I cut down on plans that I may have in the future to make sure that I am meeting my monthly budget. I'm pretty strict in terms of that for myself, and I think part of that is having friends who are conscious about money as well. I think that's one of the most important things. My friends and I, we do a lot of potlucks. And it's great. And it's the same amount of fun, and it's not going out to the bar to get a $12 drink, but it's still an enriching experience for me, at least. I think it's just important to understand that right now I'm living on borrowed money, and medical school is expensive. It's not just the tuition, you are paying for all of your external resources. For example, that step 1 exam that I keep talking about, there are question banks for that exam. And they cost anywhere from $100 to $400, and most people will get 1 or 2. I just bought Pathoma, which is a great resource for pathology. That was another $100. I'm going to buy First Aid, which is the Step 1 Bible, they say. That's another $50. It is a lot of money, and to register for the Step 1 exam, it is $600. And there's no fee assistance programs. You're kind of on your own unless you're relying on your parents. And anyway, it's borrowed money, right? The government's giving you the money, you just got to give it right back to those testing programs. So what I did very practically was I wasn't making a lot of money during the time that I was paying for my MCAT class. I did take an MCAT class, and I wasn't making a lot of money when I was applying, and there's a lot of application fees. I don't know if you all have looked into it, but each application you have to send in money, and you have to pay money to take the MCAT, and you have to pay money for the common app for medical school. So what I did was I took out a credit card with 0% APR for the year. And so what I did was I charged all of my expenses on that credit card, and I made a payment once a month. And if you have 0% APR, you're not paying interest on that money. So that for me was super helpful. So right now I'm still paying off my medical school application money, but I'm not paying interest on that. So that's really, really, really important. You never want to be paying interest on a credit card. So that's what I did, and I funded, even though I was making only that much money for the 2 years that I was out of school, I funded my entire MCAT and medical school application stuff myself without my parents, because that's not an option for me. I can't ask my parents for money in that way, and I made it work. Again, like I said, a lot of potlucks. But yeah, I think again, you just really have to be aware that whatever money you take out during this time, you will be paying for down the line when maybe you have a family, maybe you have kids, maybe you want to go on that vacation. So I think it's important to really think about that. The way they do it is they let you decide how much money you want to take out from the government, and you can keep adding to that. Even if I ran out of money, I could go back to the loan office and ask for a little bit more. So I would be stingy with it. I would take out a little bit at a time and sort of see what's reasonable for me to survive on as a budget, and then move from there. Does that answer that question? I see a lot of, yeah, go ahead.
Do you or any of your classmates make time to work at all?
That's a good question. I said that I would. when I got there. Again, I sort of came in with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. You know, I've been working for 2 years. Like, I'm not a student. I can handle a little bit more than being a student. I was working 12 hours a day, you know, and I was wrong. It's hard to be a student, and I learned that really quickly. I'm still sort of adjusting to medical school, and I don't know that I could handle a job on top of that. People do make time. They do work study. And they do research. So it's doable, but not for me right now. Any other questions?
Does anybody have questions for Natasha?
Please ask them. Go ahead.
I was wondering if you'd be willing to speak a little bit to the transition of going to the workforce and then coming back to school.
Yeah.
I know it's something that a lot of people say is very difficult. It's the idea of leaving school but then having to get back into this motor study.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I don't know
Can
if
you repeat the question so we'll have it?
Oh yeah, sure. She was wondering like how the transition for me was to go from the workforce and then back to being a student again, because it is a little bit challenging. I think, and especially if you have parents who are worried about taking time off, like especially for people who come from families that maybe don't know the system as well and don't really understand what it means to apply to medical school in the United States. For me, that was something that was really poignant. So you never really stop applying to medical school. When you leave college, especially if you're taking time off, you're either studying for your MCAT or you're getting your application together. So that for my parents was very reassuring in terms of you're never really away from that process enough to sort of get lost. You're always like working towards going to medical school, so there's never really a chance that you wouldn't go. I know that's not really answering your question, but I just wanted to say that really quickly. And then in terms of transitioning, like for me, into the workforce and then out of it, it was a little bit, I think there are two parts of it. One is that it was a little bit jarring to sort of really understand that my actions were affecting other people. I know that sounds really silly, but it's true. I worked on teams at Barnard, but really I worked towards my own academic success. And I know I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but I cannot stress it enough. I worked on a team very closely with 2 other women. We were very different. One of us is from Minnesota, one of us is from California, one of us is from New Jersey. We all majored in different things. We have different life aspirations. We worked in a very close setting for 2 years, and we had to like each other, and that's tough. When I came from Barnard, I came from like a very strong group of women. They aligned perfectly with how I feel and think and interact with the world, and that is not the case outside of Barnard and outside of my group of friends and your group of friends, and that's an adjustment. Working with adults who don't agree with you is hard. And I was also teaching, so I was working with teenagers who have personalities, and that was probably the most exciting part of my job, but yeah, it's definitely challenging. So I think like interacting with people that you wouldn't necessarily choose to interact with, that is one of the hardest parts about being an adult, and that is something that I learned transitioning into the workforce. That is to say, like, those 2 women are now 2 of my best friends. We recently got matching tattoos, so that's how that went, just in case anyone was wondering. And then transitioning back to being a student is tough because my friends who are now in the workforce, they go to work. Most of them are teachers, so it's not 9 to 5, it's 7 to 7, and they grade papers and they do a lot of that. But they do get to leave their work at work. Their weekends are their own. For me, it's a little bit different. I'm studying a lot, and I have to make a decision. You know, I can't go to Maryland with them on the weekend when I have to be here studying, and I have to make that choice. And being a student is a 24/7 job. You may not be studying all the time, but you are always thinking about your exams, and you're always thinking about the material, and that is different than being in the workforce. Does that help? Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so you transition, and it's difficult, but you do it. It's just a matter of getting into a routine, one way or the other. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have her email address.
Yeah, if you have questions, please, you can get in touch with me through Ray.
Okay. So our next speaker is going to be Tubba. Oh, please have some more pizza. Tubba, you have your own water, right? Yeah. Do you need
Last week because I had no voice.
Mark, you need we forgot to bring some.
Pocket, waistband. Beautiful. Does it work? Yeah.
I think it's 150 per bottle.
Your honesty is refreshing. Thank you. There's nothing harder than working.
We have to stay inside, sorry to say.
Remember that
We're
when you
not
go
allowed
into
to
the
be
next.
girlish or free. Our next speaker is our very own Professor Tova Klein, and I'm really grateful to her for coming. She is one of the most famous professors at Barnard, and she has, I know she's going to laugh at this, but she has been a role model for me in feeling clearly what she wants to do and then going ahead and doing it. And in doing that, she's become an incredibly famous person in the country. I'm really, really proud of her. So I think she will tell you her own story, but we're lucky that she was able to come today. She has a very unusual career course.
Great, thank you. Marie knows that means a lot to me because I went off a path that professors are supposed to be on, which is not easy to do. So thank you for having me. And I was just telling Natasha that I loved her honesty and her comments because there is nothing harder than going from school to the work world and then to a professional world because people are hard to work with. They're very hard to work with. So I'm going to try to sum up my 30 years since college in 15 minutes. In ways that I hope will be helpful to you. So for those of you who don't know me, I am a professor in psychology, and I have really the pleasure of running the Center for Toddler Development here. And if you've seen the toddlers on the 4th floor, that's what I get to do. So I work with toddlers, I work with parents, and I work with wonderful students like you. I have all aspects in my life. But I'm just going to start with college and how I got here, because there's a couple messages I hope you'll take from this. One is that you can find out your passions and things you love, but you can't always plan your life, right? You can make some choice points, but they don't always go in directions that you even know. You don't even know what doors are going to be open. And I think we all learned that this week with the election. You don't know outcomes, but then you find new paths, or we will find new paths. So I went to the big college. I went to University of Michigan, and I really developed two passions there. One I came with, which is that I've always been not only enjoyed children, but fascinated by them, truly fascinated by sort of what are their inner workings and how come some children go right and how come some children don't, and that's always been an interest. And while I was in college, I was a psych major, but I also had this idea that I would go on in psychology, so I took the minimum number of psych courses that you could take at Michigan and graduate with a psychology degree. Which I did, but I also did two other things there that really, I think, established my eventual career path. One is I had an opportunity to teach at the university preschool. Sounds like my job here, right? And they didn't typically hire students. I somehow talked my way into it. I'm still not sure. They had an opening, and I went in, and they said, we don't hire students. I said, oh, well, I saw this job ad, and I really like children, so I taught as an assistant teacher, first in a 4-year-old class, then in a 3-year class, then in a 2-year-old class. So that was kind of my income. But I also started doing research, which at Barnard, we have lots of opportunities. At a place like Michigan, certainly in the 80s, there was almost zero opportunities for students. But I kind of lucked into something. I babysat for someone who said, we need a research assistant, are you interested? So I said, yeah, that sounds cool. So I started basically on attachment research there, and I just kind of went in saying, this kind of looks cool, and got more and more involved, and then they have an honors program at Michigan, and then you do a thesis, otherwise you can't do a thesis. And I became fascinated by research. So I was developing these two kind of passions, but I was seeing it unfold. But I was done with college when I finished college, and I left and I moved to the big city. I am a true New Yorker because I was born here, but I didn't grow up here. And as some of us were discussing before this, you could just do that in those days. I just moved here, no job, no nothing. I just said, I'll find something. And I actually had great opportunities come my way, but you also have to make them happen. So I moved here, I did a lot of part-time jobs, and I wanted to work in the research unit that Bank Street College used to have with young children. And people told me, just get a job there. Like, if you have to serve meals or sweep it, just get yourself in there. And I did. I became a substitute at their daycare center, which was not what I wanted to do. I knew at that point I didn't want to be an early childhood teacher, but I was interested in psychology. But within 6 months, I had met somebody who said, oh, I know an opening in the research division, and I started doing research on homeless children. And again, got fascinated with this idea that some children, amidst the worst life circumstances, could still do well, and became very interested in wanting to know more. But I have to say, I loved being out of school. And I did have one parent who was very fond of that, and one parent who was calling me constantly and saying, are you ever going to get your PhD? And I would say, yes, one day. So what led me to finally go get that degree was that it's hard to work for other people and be dependent on their grant money. So this was a time that there was a lot of homelessness in New York, and people were piecing together grants so that I could stay funded. And I was working with homeless children who were living in shelters, and I was enjoying all of it. But I started to think, if I don't have the expertise to really figure out these research questions, then I'm going to be dependent on other people my whole life. And I also was living on a low income in New York, but it's doable. It was doable then. I think it's doable now. You have to be pretty frugal. And that's what actually sent me back to school. Was I was tired of being dependent on other people's grants, basically. But one of the questions I know on that sheet was, did you explore other options? And I did yes and no. So it was very clear to me when I was in a preschool that I could never be a preschool teacher. It wasn't going to grab me in the ways that I wanted, that I couldn't do that full time. So I decided that the way to influence children's lives was to be a lawyer. And I took a pre-law course in college. It was the best thing I ever did. I was bored within 3 weeks. First I thought, this is so cool. You're analyzing these kind of puzzles. And by the time we got to the third week, we were doing, for me, the same thing over and over. I just thought, I'll never make it through law school. And then when I was here thinking I really should be going into psychology, and that kind of science grabbed me, I thought, well, maybe I should be a public policy person. I should learn how you figure out how to develop policy. And I sat in on some courses and just said, no, that's not for me. And eventually got back to probably where I had started, which was that I wanted to be a researcher and I wanted to be able to work with children directly. And I did go to graduate school thinking, well, if a research career doesn't work out, I want a backup. And if you go into clinical psych, you have a backup. But I chose a program that was heavily research. And I chose a program that I had full funding for. So that loan question was very pertinent to me, which was the school I really wanted to go back to was Michigan, but they couldn't offer me the same money that Duke was offering me. And if you had ever said to me ever in my life, you will end up at Duke, I would have said, I will never end up in the South. It's just not for me. It's hard to turn down money. And I recommend that you put that high on your list. I had 4 years of funding. I had a stipend I could live on. The stipend I was being offered at NYU, there's no way I could live here. But in Durham, North Carolina, at that time, you could live on a very small stipend. I actually met my husband in graduate school. He also had a fully funded medical school, which is rare. So we both came out of grad school with, I owed maybe $5,000 in loans because I was not good enough about living just on my loans. I wanted a vacation occasionally. But we literally came out of school with no debt, and it really helped our career paths, especially for two of us who are now together trying to figure out where we wanted to be in life. So I think you should put that high on your list, even if you have to turn down what you thought was the place you wanted to be. It opens doors. So while I was in grad school, I got through graduate school. I am one of those people who has all my life thought I could do anything. I didn't know there was a glass ceiling, quite honestly. My mother worked at a time that probably, well, there were few women at her university. She got her degree with 3 children. She got her PhD. I just thought you could do everything. Never dawned on me, honestly, that you couldn't. So I came to New York. People said to me, there's the perfect job for you at Barnard. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to actually be in academics. And people in my grad school kept saying, where else are you going to do research? And I was like, I don't know. Can't you do research not at a university? And they said, no. If you want to do research, you have to have an academic job. So timing, you should know, is everything. I happened to move to New York at a time that the person who had the job that I have now was someone I knew, and I called him up and said, can I just talk to you about opportunities in New York? He said, my job is opening up. I think you're ideal for it, but I can't write a letter for you. I'm writing it for someone else. I said, that's fine. I applied. This is not a normal academic story. You don't usually apply for one job. But I got this job at Barnard. I thought, this is great. I can do research. I can run a program with children. I can work with parents. This is ideal. It seemed ideal to me. And then I had a child, because now I was in my 30s, well into my 30s. And it's hard. It's hard to do research, teach well, run a program, have a baby, and then I had a second baby. And that's the other thing I would say to you. If you want children, you can do both. There is no question. And my advisor at Duke, who I just had the pleasure of seeing, I hadn't seen her in 15 years. I gave a talk at Duke last week. She kept saying to me, if you want a family, academics is ideal for you. I said, it seems like a lot of pressure. She said, where else are you going to get that flexibility? And I didn't understand that until I had children. That there actually are ways to either do work from home, not easy, but also to arrange to go to your child's school. You can't do that if you're in a job that literally you have to be there 9 to 5. The downside of academics is you work all the time. You do a lot of evening work, but you can also put children to bed and do work. So I was here and all seemed well. Then I realized I couldn't do it all. I had 2 children. I had a pretty big job here. Barnard expects a lot of your professors, and we give it. And I had really hit a wall, I have to say. But then the other piece was I was at Barnard, and I had expanded the toddler center because I thought, well, this program's working so well. Shouldn't it be more? And my department was very supportive. They were like, do whatever works for you. And I thought we needed more research subjects and more opportunities for students. So we then started some second-year program for students. I couldn't do it all. But at the same time, the program had gotten bigger, and I had an opportunity. I was on the tenure track. You have to publish, but I really wanted to run this program well. There's only so many hours in the day. That's my other message to you. I don't think I realized you have to sleep at some point in your life, even if I don't sleep a lot. So I had the opportunity to leave the tenure track, which may not sound like a lot, but if any of you are planning an academic career, being on the tenure track, becoming an assistant professor, and then moving up the ranks to full professor, that's what you want. That's what anybody who aspires in academics really wants. And it was a real crisis for me. And I run into lots of women in academics and other professional fields who go through this crisis at some point with children. You want to be a parent, you want to have a career, how are you going to do both? Having a supportive spouse is tremendously helpful. Again, maybe you can't plan for that. I happen to have that. But it is stressful, and it's stressful in your relationship with your spouse to have children and career. So I had this kind of rare opportunity because of the toddler center. And I went off the tenure track, which was not easy. And I have to say, Ray has been incredibly supportive. I had 2 colleagues and 1 emeritus colleague who were incredibly supportive of me, and that's what allowed me to do it. But then I was in crisis. Like, now I'm kind of a professor, but I'm not really. Now what do I do? And so I kind of muddled along until I decided I should write a book. I don't know in what time I thought I was going to write that book. But for years, people said to me, you know, you really should write a book. And I was a little bit torn because, you know, my roots were with working with at-risk children. While I was in graduate school, it was the height of the AIDS crisis. I spent any extra hours that I had or didn't have working in pediatric AIDS. I did that in the Bronx when I first got here. And I was starting to get back into working with programs, which I still do, in the South Bronx and in Harlem that were working with very at-risk children. And now I decided I should write this book, which was a little crazy. But part of it came out of people, the parents at my center, colleagues, professional colleagues, and also book people saying you really should write a book. So I decided to write a book. I don't recommend it, actually, if you're on this track. I got this idea that I could really take the research base that I had and my scientific knowledge and turn it into knowledge for parents and educators in early childhood. Because I felt like the web is big, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of misinformation. And I have to say, it turned out probably to be the best move I ever made, partly because it combined my passions. And if you find things that you're passionate about, it will drive you. If that's research in a lab and you're excited about it, you'll keep doing it. If that's being a lawyer and you love your area of law, you keep doing it. But I see this over and over with women, friends of mine, colleagues. If you aren't passionate about something and you hit that kind of work family phase of now what do I do, it's very hard to stick to that work, right? We all probably slow down when our kids are very little, but you keep it going and you get back to it because it really drives you. And my work, I have to say, my work really drives me. I don't think any of us love every piece of our work, but for the most part, I'm really fueled by what I do. So I wrote this book in 2014, and that probably came out, that was not a door that I was looking for. Another piece that I'd say is, I was doing research in a lab because, to get tenure, you have to do very specific kind of research. I was interested in it, but finding it very difficult, and it was very slow, and 9/11 happened. And 9/11 happened, and I felt very driven by, I've got to do something to help young children. And hooked up with a colleague at Columbia, we kind of ran downtown. I say we were ambulance chasers, but for good reason. And we started a study of the children after 9/11, children under 5. The effects on them, their parents, and I had no time for that. And I have to honestly say, I was actually told by Barnard, not my department, not anybody here, but the message was given, this will never get you tenure. I was still in the tenure track, and I thought, I can't live in New York and not be doing something that's both important and will help children. So I did that, and that actually really spurred me on to think you really can take the science and put it right out there and then help children. And so I think that's partly what then segued into this book was, there's another way to reach parents, and I could reach parents that way. So I wrote that book, and part of it was that I got some calls from literary agents. You can't plan for this, right? In 1 week, I got 2 phone calls from 2 different literary agents. And I always, in the past, people would say, can I introduce you to my friend who's a literary agent? I would say no. I thought, well, that's kind of weird, 2 calls in 1 week. So I met with both of them, thinking I would never write a book. And then I thought after those meetings, maybe I should write a book. And then I signed on with one of them. And it was a really exciting, terrifying and exciting process. Terrifying because I wasn't sure what Barnard would think. I wasn't sure what it would do the rest of my career. I wasn't sure if anyone would ever buy a single copy of the book. But that led to many opportunities. So that was in 2014, so just 2.5 years ago that it came out. And that has just opened a whole other world for me, which I have to say I have loved. I didn't expect it. People said, you have to go on TV. I was like, oh, no, not me. They said, oh, yes, you have a book. You're in New York. You have to do that. You have to go on radio. But it's also allowed me to be in contact with new programs that I've been working with, going to other places and speaking. So it really has, for me, tied together the science-y part of me, the applied part of me, and the part that really wants to help parents do what is a struggle to do, which is raise young children. So that's kind of how I got to where I am now with a book, a center. I still manage to do some research, not as much as I did before, and I still get to teach Barnard and Columbia students. So I think my message to you is get the knowledge that you want, but it's got to be something you care about, and you can kind of take it in directions, but you don't know what those directions are going to be. Did I miss anything? Any questions? Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the actual process of getting a PhD, like what does it entail, application process, and also like what's it like while you're getting one?
It's a good question because like Natasha was saying, I went from the work world, which I loved being out of school, and I didn't go to school in New York, so I loved being in New York. Going back to school for me was actually quite hard, and I considered dropping out after my first year. So I had several places that I could have gone. The admissions process, certainly in clinical psych to this day, is very competitive. is my advice. I don't know if any of my advisors are here. I always say shoot for what you want to shoot for, but know that it's a numbers game. Barnard students are well qualified, but you need good GRE scores and you need good test scores, not because I think that, and good grades, not because I think that's the end all, but that's what schools do as their first cut. But you guys come out really well prepared for PhD programs because you have so much research experience, and believe me, students are not getting that level at other, particularly major universities where they don't have access to that. So it is pretty competitive, but there are lots of options. And I'm always saying to my advisees who maybe don't get in the first round, don't give up your hopes. Don't just say, oh, I'm never going to go into PhD psychology or whatever it is. Graduate school is intense. It's very intense. You hit the ground running. You have coursework, which I think in retrospect, when I think about it, they kind of want you to get out of the way. They don't tell you that, right? They're like, oh, you're here to learn. Some of the people in my class hadn't been out of school, some had. Those of us who had, I thought coursework we're just supposed to learn. I didn't know we got graded. And the first term when they sent us like we didn't do emails so much, they sent us like this paper. I was like, we got grades in graduate? I thought we were just there to do something else. And research kicks in right away, and you live in a lab. Like no matter what kind of work you're doing, I was coding videotapes, I was transcribing and coding, and you're totally focused on your area. So you're not focused, let's say I was doing clinical psych, but I was really, the reason I went to Duke beyond the money was that I could do both developmental and clinical, which no other program would allow. They were like, oh sure, you could do a little this, a little that, which meant more work for me, but I said, well, why couldn't I do both? You're very focused on your research, and it's only you who's doing your research. If you don't show up and work on your research project, nobody else is doing it for you. So it's very intense, and it's very intensive. So after that first year, I did an internship at Yale, which I had set up that summer before I went, and I'd set it up with my mentor, and she basically said, that's fine if you never get behind in your research. Of course, I was like, why would I get behind? I didn't know that the summers were spent doing research for 3 months. I said, no problem, I want to do a policy internship in case I want to do public policy. And while I was at Yale, I said to this very famous person that I was working with, if you know the father of Head Start is this man, Ed Ziegler, I had this opportunity to work with him, and I was terrified of him, to be honest. And he said that to me, he said, you're afraid of me, aren't you? I said, yes. And he said, and you're really unhappy? And I said, yes. He said, why don't you want to go back to Duke? And I just said, I don't know that this is what I want to do. And he said to me, do you have a good research mentor? I said, I have a great research mentor. He said, are you funded? I said, yeah. And he said, forget everything else, put it all aside, go back and get your degree. It was the best advice I ever got. I went back. I just said, you know what, I got to put my head down for 3 years. And when you come up for air a little bit, because once your coursework is done in any PhD program, I think it's probably true, you're doing research and you're doing your own research. You're in a lab, but you're doing research that hopefully you really care about. It's exciting. So it's long hours, it's exciting, and I did pick up work on the side. It was hard. I could have lived just on my $800 a month stipend. But I would pick up, and I picked up really interesting work. There's always work for graduate students. They always want you. But what you really have to know is that when you go, it's completely different than college. Like Natasha was saying about medical school, you are focused on psychology. Now, the first year, the courses are, there's a little bio. I'm sure now there's neuroscience. We didn't have that so much. There's stuff you don't want to take, but it quickly gets very focused, and you are living and breathing that. So it's a pretty big commitment. And if you're going to go into something like clinical, even if you're not, anything with research, it's not 4 years. It's really 5, 6 years for the whole thing. Usually once you get past your prelims, so your first, after your second, usually in your third year, you kind of feel like, okay, I'm going to be okay.
Any other questions? Is your question answered? Does anyone else have interest in clinical? We have a few minutes. How do you get in?
None of you are going into clinical?
Yeah, I guess on that, so how do you match with when you apply to a program, right, then how do you decide what kind of research are you doing, or do you match with a professor, or how does it work?
So I think this is true. It's a good question. Certainly in clinical, but I think this is true across PhD programs in psychology. you want to be looking at programs where there are people doing research that interests you, right? So this is also different than college. You go to college, say, oh, there's going to be all these options, but when you go to graduate school, you know, you might have a vague area, but you want to be looking for places that actually have people doing. I knew that I wanted to do parent-child work. I actually had a mentor who convinced me that I didn't want to be doing that with at-risk kids or I'd never get out of graduate school. That's true. She said, if you're going to be doing a study of abused kids, you'll be here forever trying to get a sample through, you know, child welfare. But you want to be in a place where enough people are doing research that interests you, that both when you apply and you show your interest, they see a match, but also that you're going to find people. You don't want to apply to a place that you say, wow, none of these areas really interest me. In this era, certainly in clinical psych, you almost have to apply to certain professors. It's not that hard with email. You can email a professor and say, you know, my interest, are you taking students? That's the big question for graduate school.
That's true for all.
Any
At
field.
Columbia, that's the first. That
Are
grade
you
is the
taking
first cutoff, and then the professor you work with
Is
is
the
definitely the next.
And if it's a professor you want to work with, but they say I don't have room for a new student or I don't have funding, that tells you right away, well, if I apply to Columbia, this professor's not taking students. So you do want to find out as much of that as you can in any field of psychology PhD as you can. There is some matching that goes on.
I have a question. What is the name of your book?
The name of my book is How Toddlers Thrive. And then it has a long subtitle because publishers make you put a long subtitle on that.
I understand you've consulted for Sesame Street and what?
I have to say, being in my field, which combines areas, I have had wonderful doors open, and being in New York opens doors. So a number of years ago, I got to consult for Sesame Workshop. For 3 years, I was one of their developmental consultants. I now consult to the Children's Museum of Manhattan. So there are really huge opportunities to apply. I also work with a program in the South Bronx, the Hunts Point Alliance for Children. We had a meeting set up yesterday and we held it. I have to say it was hard, but what was she talking about? They're trying to get pro bono lawyers together quickly because they have 100 days to try to set up a system so that the parents have some backup because of the deportations that people are fearing. So you can get involved in all kinds of things with a doctorate. It gives you heft, you know, people like that.
Okay, last question.
Is your study about the effects of 9/11 on young children still going on?
It's a great question. It's not. I mean, I still have data that we're actually working on, but it's the data that we collected then. We did not follow up. We didn't follow up because we couldn't get funded to do it. Yeah, it is a shame. Oh, great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Once again, feel free to have some more pizza and your own water. And I'm really grateful to Matt Thompson for coming to speak to us today. I have 2 boys, and I always feel that, of course, I love the women of Barnard, and I always wanted more children, and I'm desperate for a girl, so I got you instead. I think we sometimes feel that girls and women have special problems that other people don't have, and I know that's not true. The struggles in your careers and in your decision making and in finding mentors and in getting grades and all this stuff, my boys have the same problems on many domains. And in this series, we're going to have both men and women. And I have to thank Matt for being the first and for coming today. When my son was supposed to come, but he ended up going out of town. So I didn't have another guy to keep you company, but Matt has a really interesting story, and he was very passionate about it on the phone. And I'm going to let you tell it yourself. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
He graduated from Columbia in
The School of General Studies, so obviously not Barnard. I went to General Studies, and you know, they always say that all the General Studies students have a story. So my story definitely starts before I came to Columbia. Back in high school, when I was positive that I was going to be a rocket scientist. So I went to a great school for aerospace engineering, the Utah State University, where I realized that I did not want to be an engineer stuck in a cubicle all day designing one screw that might go on a rocket someday somewhere. That was definitely not for me. But I discovered that I did have a job that I loved, which was randomly doing market research. I was a supervisor and then a manager in a little market research phone center. I loved working with all the employees there. I managed about 100 employees. I love trying to encourage them to do better, find new ways to get them to really focus and try to talk to people over the phone, get their opinions about things. We never sold anything, I promise. You can call after 9 p.m. Well, I guess telemarketing isn't much of a thing anymore. Sorry. So I spent this a year off from college in the real world working. Before I went back to school, I applied to Columbia, where I could come and look into going more in the direction of health sciences. I come from a background, my dad is in food science, my mom is a nurse. My dad was also interested in going to medical school when he was younger. So that was kind of the direction I went in, and I decided to major in neuroscience at Columbia. I got distracted by many things, and it ended up, all of the things that I got distracted by ended up being a part of my career later on. I want to echo something that Tova said, the things that happen to us you can't really control. And when I realized this, I started making my life not about choosing a path, but about opening doors and making sure I was ready for opportunities when they presented themselves. So it was difficult for me because I was on this path and I kind of wanted to go to medical school because I wanted to be a leader in healthcare. Medical school is not where you go to be a leader in healthcare. I think the medical schools could see that in my applications. They knew because I tried a couple years in a row and never got an interview. It was very hard. I put a lot of work and a lot of energy into it. But what made me able to move on and really find my direction was that I got a job at a place where I knew that I would be doing something I liked. So I got a job in whatever random healthcare field I could, working at a laboratory at the Columbia University Medical Center, grossing biopsies, actually. Just, so when a doctor does a biopsy, they take the tissue out, they put it in a little container with formaldehyde, and ship it off to the guy who was me, and I would take it out, measure it, fold it up, put it away, and repeat 200 times. It was tedious and annoying. But I got to work alongside pathologists who'd been through medical school and residency. I got to work alongside residents who were struggling through their residency and had just come out of medical school. I got to meet technicians. I learned about healthcare administrators. I learned about nurses and all of the support staff, all of the thousands of positions that make a hospital run, that make up our healthcare system. And I said, holy crap, this is amazing. There are so many opportunities here. And I looked across the street, I saw the Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health, and I said, that's where you go to be a healthcare leader. So I applied, and as was my pattern, when I came to Columbia, I only applied to Columbia because I decided that was where I wanted to go, and somehow I got in. When I went to Mailman, I only applied to Mailman, and somehow I got in. This goes to what I said about the medical schools, kind of seeing that I didn't want to be there. If you're really passionate about going someplace, and I'm not saying only apply to one place, because that's kind of stupid, don't do that. Apply to several places, have backups. But if you're really passionate about something and you know what you want to be doing, that'll come through in your application, and they'll see that, and you'll be accepted. you might be accepted to somewhere that you didn't think you wanted to go, but maybe they saw something that will connect you with that place. So at Mailman, it was interesting. I did a part-time program. I went to class after work. Luckily, it was across the street, and I lived a couple blocks away, so it was a lot easier than I think it was for most people. A lot of people had, a job downtown, lived across the bridge in Jersey. They were driving around all the time and constantly doing homework, and it was really hard. But the great thing about it was all about my classmates and I. There was a requirement that you had to have 2 years of work experience in order to get into this program. And I realized once I got in that was because we learned from each other a lot more than we learned from the professors. The professors would pose questions, and we would answer them and argue amongst ourselves, and it ended up we were the ones who were really teaching the classes. And it was great and fun and super interesting. And it also really helps to be working at the same time, because I could take what I was learning and immediately apply it at work. While I was going to the Mailman school, I was slowly moving up the ranks at work. First they let me dissect gallbladders instead of just measuring biopsies. And then I moved on to placentas. We don't talk about that period. After that, I was offered a position as the only technician in the hematopathology section, because their technician had disappeared from the stress of it and hadn't been in for 3 months. They hadn't seen hide nor hair of him, and they needed someone to come in and make it work. I had seen cells under a microscope once before when I was studying neuroscience here. I tried out some research. I counted a bunch of cells. I said, research is not for me. This is way too tedious, and there's too low of a chance of me actually getting published. So I do not want to do this, which was another indicator that I was no good for medical school, or for PhD programs, for that matter. And I said, yes, this sounds great. This sounds like an awesome opportunity. I love to learn. Let me do it. And it's possibly kind of stupid, but I learned an entire medical subspecialty. I just sat at the microscope every day. I stared at bone marrow slides. I learned the morphology. I learned how to differentiate one cell type from another. And after 3 years of doing it, I was able to diagnose all sorts of things just by looking at someone's bone marrow. I could look at someone's bone marrow and be like, oh, this person is an alcoholic, probably. Or this person has HIV, even though those are things that you don't diagnose in bone marrow. Because I did it every day and I really worked at it, and I pushed myself. And this experience was amazing, and it was kind of what I was looking for. I feel like it was kind of what I was looking for when I was in college, and I never got. I wanted to learn practical things in college. I wanted to learn things that I could use. I wanted to master something, and that doesn't happen in college. It doesn't. You don't learn those things. You learn how to learn, which is great and very helpful, but then things change when you make it to the real world and you really have to become an expert. And it's a really great experience to do so. The people I worked with saw how I took responsibility for the entire area, how I jumped at everything and just owned it, and I was given more opportunities for advancement. This past spring, I moved to a different laboratory. I'm now in the division of immunogenetics and histocompatibility, which is a mouthful and sounds really awesome because it is sometimes. Where I am the quality assurance manager. And that brings in a lot of the things that distracted me when I was in college. I got distracted by computer games. I got distracted by organizing and running meetings at my fraternity house, which were only sort of meetings and more parties than meetings. And now at work, I apply the same analytical skills that I use to master computer games to master the quality control of our instruments, to optimize those instruments instead of optimizing my character in the video game. I use my skills at controlling meetings of rowdy frat boys to control meetings of arrogant doctors. It's all applicable, and it's all it all guided me to this one place. And it happened because I did what I could to open doors. And then I followed the doors that interested me the most. And I didn't stress too much about the ones that got shot in my face. So yeah. Any questions?
What's your title and what's your day like? What do you do
Right.
for the day?
Questions.
And your title?
My title is QA manager. My day, it's a 9 to 5 job with an hour lunch in the middle, but most people don't make it into the lab until like 9:30, 10. I can basically come in anytime I want between 8 and 10:30, and then just leave 8 hours later, which is kind of nice. When I come in, actually the one thing that I dislike about my job currently is I wish there was a little bit more structure. Because my days are made of managing all sorts of little projects that I've set up for myself. I'm trying to change this system, or I want to create a new form for this, or I want to rewrite this procedure, and a lot of it is dependent on what other people are doing and when other people are available, and also dependent on what I feel like working on, what I feel like doing. So sometimes it can be hard to get in and motivate myself to, work on this because it's due tomorrow instead of working on this other more fun thing that's due next week. And I do wish I had a little bit more structure, kind of like when I had daily specimens to go through. But
So you go in at 8:30 and then?
I go in at 8:30, more like 9 usually. I check my email, I check the schedules, I make sure that we're on schedule for all of our proficiency testing things. I send out reminders if I need to the directors of my lab to make sure that they're on top of things. I usually have a meeting or two where I go over things that we're changing. Sometimes I will sit with technicians and learn more about what they're doing. I'll just sit down and watch their procedure, make sure they're following the standard operating procedure the way they're supposed to be doing, while at the same time assessing what they're doing to see if maybe I should change the standard operating procedure. Maybe they're doing it in a better way than it could be done. And I put out a lot of fires. That's another thing I like doing. I like troubleshooting. People come to me and they say, "Hey, Matt, this random thing went wrong. What do I do?" And I love just investigating, figuring it out, and solving it. And then putting things into place to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Sorry, it's not a very structured day. It's a little bit loosey-goosey, so. Yes?
What was the program you were in at Maryland, and how did that turn out?
The program I was in is the part-time health policy and management program. It's kind of been joined / replaced by a master's in health administration program that they have part-time. So there's both the MPH and the MHA program now. I think if anyone wants to follow in my footsteps, the MHA program would be better. But definitely get job experience first. Go out into the world, work, see things, learn what real life is like. Because it's very different. Yeah.
How much of what you learned at the pathology lab is still applicable to your day-to-day life as an administrator?
How much of what I learned in pathology is still applicable in my day-to-day life as an administrator? Not as much, I think, as most people would consider to be worth it to do what I'm doing. And a lot of it is more the general things that I learned about basic science and how pathology is done, how tests are controlled for. The specific differences between a neoplastic lymphocyte and a non-neoplastic lymphocyte, morphologically speaking, I don't really deal with anymore, but at the same time, it's very helpful to know that I have that knowledge and to be able to fall back on it. And some of the stuff that I learned about the random markers that are on cells have helped me in the last couple of days in just reorganizing a request form for some of our testing. Organizing the markers into the specific cell lines so that it's easier for those ordering and those doing the test to understand the form. So it does help some.
Did your job help pay for your tuition?
No. Wait, well, not the tuition that mattered. Sorry, I did my job help pay for my tuition? Yes. It did, but it didn't really matter because I had over $100,000 in loans from my undergraduate. So my job covered my graduate degree, which was kind of a requirement for me for going back to school because I had over $100,000 in debt from the School of General Studies. Now this obviously put a huge damper on, originally when I was planning on going to medical school, I was saying to myself, oh crap, I have to join the military and make them pay for it. I have to do this, I have to do that, because I really can't afford to take out any more loans. On a day-to-day basis, even that extreme amount of loans doesn't have as much of an effect as you might think it does. Something that really helped was in the first semester of my MPH, we had to take a finance and accounting class, and that class really helped me understand my loans and what they meant and how to really view myself as a company that is heavily leveraged. So I have to push myself to make sure that equity investment is good. I highly recommend, if you have large amounts of loans, taking out some more loans and taking a finance class. I promise. It's worth it.
Oh wait, who paid for graduate school?
Columbia paid for graduate school.
Tell us about that.
Well, so at the time I was a part of the support staff at the Columbia University Medical Center, which is in a union, and the union employees get different benefits from officers. So union employees get the first 7 credits free of charge at any Columbia degree program, while officers get 40% tuition reduction at any Columbia degree program. So the difference there was because I was taking a part-time program and I was in the union meant that I literally did not pay anything at all. And I actually had an opportunity for advancement while I was in the program, and which would have included a significant, like $15,000 a year raise that I turned down because those $15,000 a year were less than what I would have been paying out of pocket because of the reduced tuition assistance. So.
Any other questions? So that's one way to get some of your tuition paid, working in a place that has benefits.
One other thing on the loans, I think it's important to note. So my fiance and I are starting to talk about buying a house outside the city, which means that my giant loans will become more of a problem, and so I'm starting to look at refinancing, which is going to be a bit of a nightmare because my loans are kind of scattered, lots of little loans with different names on them. My parents took out some in their name, I have some in my name, and it's just try to keep them consolidated. Make sure you have all your paperwork in order. Have a record of all the different loans you have, especially if you start getting different ones, because it's going to be helpful later on to be able to really know what you have.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think there's still pizza if anyone's hungry, just get some. And our last speaker of the evening, Margaret Roberthan, is an incredibly dynamic speaker. She worked in my lab, but never wanted to be a neuroscientist. And she now works at PricewaterhouseCoopers and probably makes more money than anybody else that we've heard at this event tonight or last time. So I want to repeat what I said last time. I think it is important to have enough money. Enough is enough. I don't recommend following a Trump-like career course. Enough is enough, and enough is sufficient. And Margaret has one way of doing it.
Okay, so I'm going to try and wake you guys up. And just so you know, I speak really quickly. If I start speaking quickly, just like wave to me or something, because when I get in the zone, I'm not going to know if I'm speaking. Also, I don't like being on camera, but when Ray called me, she goes, like, do you mind? And I was like, I do mind, but I'll do it for the Barnard babies. So this is for you, and you better appreciate it. Did you get that? All right, so hi, I'm Margaret, and I graduated 4 years ago. My 5-year reunion is next year, and I feel old. In 2012, I graduated. I worked with Ray for 3 years in her lab. I was a research assistant, which was interesting because I was a political science major, which you may wonder, as she did, when she found out I was hired, because she didn't hire me, what was I doing there? Well, I wanted to do public health, and Barnard does not offer public health. So I had to piece it together by doing political science and chemistry. So that's what I was doing. Yeah, it makes sense now, right? Yeah. Everyone in interviews had the same faces you guys had. What were you doing? I thought about it, guys. I thought about it. All right, so I always wanted to work in healthcare. It's the only career I ever thought of. Also because my parents are immigrants and I was given 2 career options, doctor or lawyer. And so I chose doctor. And I'm also here to tell you that careers don't come in packages, despite what you've been told, or despite especially what Barnard and Columbia try and convince you is true. There's no such, there's this idea, I thought when I was here, that, if you're either going to be a doctor or a lawyer, or you're going to go to a PhD program, be a researcher. That's not true at all. That's a way people go about their lives, and power to them. But I knew that was never going to be my path, and that doesn't have to be your path either. So how I got here, always wanted to work in healthcare due to my experiences in healthcare that I'm not going to get into, but subsequently made me really passionate about how we structure healthcare financing in this country, vulnerable groups, and healthcare access. I was lucky enough to be born in 1990. I voted for Barack Obama in 2008, so I gave myself a job that year because I'm now a healthcare strategist. So I mean that to say that I can envision a really good time when healthcare was entering national consciousness. And I'm really worried about the next coming years because we don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know what's going to happen. But I feel confident enough in saying that healthcare is something that's on our national consciousness and that everyone is thinking about right now. And that even that business as usual is not going to cut it anymore, I think, for anybody. And so I, as worried as I am for things, know that we've already seen how bad they can be, and we're not going to go back there, is what I tell myself every day for the past 2 days. I came to Barnard, and I wanted at the time to get MD and PH, so similar to Matt, wanted to get my master's in public health. And my goal then, as it still is now actually, was to run a large international healthcare nonprofit, so something like the Red Cross, something like Care USA, something like the WHO. And so I came, and that's what I was going to do, and I was gunning really hard for this pre-med track, and it was just not going well, and I really wasn't feeling it. And funnily enough, one of my inspirations for coming to Barnard was Helene D. Gale, who was at the time when I was here, she was the president and CEO of Care USA, which is one of the largest healthcare nonprofits in the world. Have you guys heard the expression a care package? Yeah, I hope that you're saying it with capital C because it's a care package. After World War II, Care USA, they basically were saying to American households, give us a donation, say $5, $10, and we will deliver a care package to families in Europe. So that's where the expression comes from. So it's an organization that you probably may not have heard of, but they've done a lot of great work. And so when I was in high school looking up, I knew like what I wanted to do, but I didn't really know like how to get there or like how one does this. So I was literally Googling all the organizations where I may want to work, and then I was looking at their boards. And everyone seemed to have an MD-MPH, so I thought I'm going to get an MD-MPH. So when it was looking like that wasn't going to work out, it was 2012, and by the grace of God, not only was Barack Obama my commencement speaker, but Helene D. Gale got the medal distinction, because sometimes life's funny that way. I emailed her and I said, I have to meet with you. Like, you don't even know how much you've inspired me. And so she came for a talk at Barnard, and I was dumb, and I pulled an all-nighter the night before, so I was even like coherent, because that was a choice 21-year-old Margaret made. And I'm talking to her, and the only question I could like get out was, I don't want to be a doctor, and I don't want to spend years of my life getting a degree that I don't really think I'm going to use, and I don't want to take out the debt for a degree I don't think I'm going to use. But everyone seems to have it, so am I being taken seriously if I don't get that degree? And she said, you know, I have that degree, you know, it's part of my journey, but I don't use it. She goes, what I do use is my MPH. So I would stress to you, go to public health school, get your MPH, and if you feel like you need a clinical background, medical school's not going anywhere. So that's what I did. So I left Ray's lab, because my mice at Ray's lab were amazing, but I wanted to work with people, and I took a job at a hospital, the Hospital of Special Surgery. It's at 71st in New York. And there, I got a job with the physician-in-chief. And with her, I was doing patient operations and clinical trials. So it was a good transition, because for the clinical trials, it was still like a researchy type role, in that you're doing clinical research. If you don't know what a clinical trial is, before a pharmaceutical drug can hit the market, you have to test it and make sure it doesn't kill people, right? And so that's what I was doing. So it's research in the sense that you're researching a drug, but I wasn't doing like bench work or anything. It was human clinical trials. But then it was also a good transition, because the other half of my job was just patient operations. So when you're in a hospital, how do you move patients around? How do they get from point A to point B? A part of healthcare that no one really thinks about, because people just imagine patients just going into like this black box in the doctor's office and coming out healthy. A lot goes on in there that physicians don't do. So I worked there, and that was great, and that got me really interested in the consumer behavior in healthcare, consumer centricity. One thing I realized working in a hospital was how not consumer-centric healthcare was. It essentially operates as B2B, meaning business to business, and patients were not empowered. Patients a lot of times didn't really know how to make decisions. They weren't empowered to make decisions, and the system wasn't set up to view patients as customers. Healthcare is a service industry, and they don't seem to think that. And so when I went to get my MPH, I was really interested in learning more about what I could do as someone working in healthcare to lead to more customer-centric operations. How do you design hospitals to be more customer-centric? How do you make things easier to find? It would baffle me when patients would come to the hospital and they'd know where to go, and nurses and doctors were just like walking past them, people that looked obviously lost. And I thought, you can go to the mall and some people approach you if you look lost. And you're paying a hell of a lot more to be in a hospital right now, and no one's even helping you. So what does that say about our healthcare system? So I took a break after school, obviously, to work at the hospital, and I would just suggest that was one of the best decisions I ever made. Not only was I just exhausted after Barnard, like I couldn't even fathom the idea of going back to school. I think it's actually people that do get masters or degrees out after school are actually doing themselves a disservice. First of all, so I went to graduate school, but I did a professional program, meaning that my program was designed to get me into a professional position. Like I wasn't doing research in my program. But I feel, so my program required 2 years of experience. I went to Harvard and did their MPH program at the School of Public Health there. And preferred programs that require people to have work experience. Not only is just the student body, quite frankly, superior, because these are people who know what they're talking about, who have experience. Similar to what Matt was saying, you're learning so much from your classmates. I mean, you'd be surprised how much you're picking up, like not even in the classroom, but just at parties or in study sessions or really like informal situations, things. I learned so much from my classmates. And also a big part of graduate school, quite frankly, is networking and just who you're meeting. I graduated in May and I've already networked so much. One of my friends did a really bomb internship, and I already had one of my friends who's older than me from CC email me. He's now at Wharton emailing me about her. He's like in an MBA program and was like, yeah, I saw that this person is like your connection on LinkedIn. Like she did this really awesome program. Like, can you connect me to her? And I was like, yeah, I bet you want her name, don't you? Yeah, so but like you're not gonna really get that if you go to a program full of other 22-year-olds who think they're in college. Because graduate school is not college. You are there for a reason. It's very focused. It's less coursework than I would say undergrad is, but then again, we went to a really intense institution that quite frankly, I don't think most institutions are structured the way ours was. You're working so much harder than other people that are getting BAs. You're gonna meet people, it's gonna make me so angry. When I meet people who are like, I went to college, it was so much fun, it was one big party, and I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, girls were crying during Gen Chem. And I was like, I'm not even lying, you would hear that, y'all know what I'm talking about, there were sobs, right? And people were just like, I hate working, I just want to go to grad school. Those are the kind of people who go to master's programs after undergrad. You don't want to network with them, they're not going to go anywhere. Y'all aren't about that, okay? So take a break. It's really important to know what you want. I wouldn't have known that I was interested in like customer behavior if I hadn't worked in a hospital. I would have gone in lollygagging, and quite frankly, I wouldn't have gotten the job I have now. It's another important thing. A lot of people think they're going to get a master's and then come out at 24 or 23, especially those like dinky one-year masters. Don't do those. And that they're going to be a manager. You're not. You're going to get the exact same job as somebody with a BA. They might toss you $5K more per year to make you happy, but you're not going to. I don't think it's a net positive. I think you would have more debt and not really that much more. Whereas just the 2 years I took off, like before I went to grad school, because an MPH, I will say, is you got to be careful. A lot of these programs are not as good as their undergrad programs. So what I say that to mean is that you hear a big name. I'm not going to like mention specific schools, but there are some schools that have like big names. Like they have they're a good school, right? Like they have good research, they have good undergrad. But when I got into all my graduate programs, I started asking them one by one for employment data. And some of them started hemming and hawing at me, like, oh, we don't have that, we don't send that out. This is a red flag. Because if you have people going into good jobs, you should be bragging about that. Harvard had the best employment data. They had it the most organized way. They had it going back years. I could browse through it. And it was also great to have when I was in school because I knew which employers to target. One school, which was a very good school, I'm like I was surprised. It took them over a week to get me data. It wasn't even in like an Excel sheet. They literally wrote it in the body of the email. It was missing. Like sometimes they would have like the employer, but not the year and not the location or not the title. And I was like, what is this kind of nonsense you're giving me? And you want me to pay you 6 figures? No, absolutely not. But I say that because a lot of people don't check and they look at the name and they think, oh, I'm gonna do so well. This is a good school. MPHs, I will also say, especially at like not as good schools, it can very easily be a vocational degree. It can very easily be like, you don't get a lot out of it. I would say my program isn't like that, and the programs that I was taking seriously aren't like that. You just have to be careful. I think one thing I've seen is a lot of schools are pushing out these master's degrees because the market's going in that direction, right? Like, the job market, unfortunately, is going towards graduate degrees. I think a lot of schools are just like on the fly making these master's degrees everywhere. They're not all accredited. Another very good school had a program that was not accredited, you guys. I was appalled that they were at this career fair. They don't have, I'm just saying this to you to be careful. Because you guys are all smart, just don't get duped. What else? So I did my degree in health policy management. I knew I wanted to do consulting. Why do I do consulting, Margaret? Because consulting pays, and a lot of things in healthcare do not. And I have $125,000 in student loans. I tell that to you because people like to avoid talking about numbers. I think especially women avoid talking about numbers, and it's something we really need to get over. because we're not doing anybody any favors, not talking about the realities of life. My student loan payment is $1,440 a month. That is, my rent is $1,920. So as you can imagine, like, I have most of my paycheck is gone, and then I save a good amount of money, but like my free money that I get to like play with, like going to Sephora or like going out to dinner or going to brunch, like it's not as much as you would think because I have a lot of obligations. And that's okay because I built a model before I went to grad school. I built a model for how much loans I was going to take out, how much I thought the payment was going to be. I had to decide like what was the minimum like salary I could accept from a job, and that's a number you don't tell anybody. So like when you get a job and you're negotiating, there's like your rock bottom number, and you keep that. You don't tell anybody that number ever. Like just when they're asking you, oh, like what are you interested in? First of all, you never. Well, you can get into this later. But like when you're negotiating, you never tell your number first. But especially like when you start getting into the weeds with an employer about the numbers, that like the minimum you'll take, you just don't even talk about because they'll pay you more than that. But I built that into my model. Like if all goes to hell and I have to take this number. How long would it take me to pay off my loans? Like, would it be worth it? Like, what's my payback period for this degree? And it was fine. Like, once I built that model, it was okay. But then that's why employment data is important, so that like you know what kind of numbers you're looking at after graduation. And I will also say that in my program, everyone thought it was crazy. They were like, oh my God, it's September. Like, school just started. This girl is already doing case interviews. She started doing, like, Margaret's so intense. Well, you know what? Who's laughing now? Because everyone at the end was like, wow, like you really did it. And I was like, yeah, I did it. Like I wasn't playing around. This is a lot of money. This is 2 years of my life. I left a job for this. Like, you know, and it's hard leaving a job to go back to school. Mine wasn't that hard because I wasn't really making any money. But like I was making like nothing at the hospital, but just like the freedom of being able to leave your work at home is great. Like when you're a student, you guys know, there's always something you could be doing. There's a certain amount of guilt whenever you're not working, right? Like you can't, sometimes you're out with your friends having a good time, and then at like 3 a.m. you're drunk and it hits you. You should be reading. And you feel that, like, and that doesn't go away. Like even like when you're older, you're in your 20s, even people in my program are in their 30s, we would literally be at parties, and this one girl in my program was full on 30 years old, and she just goes, I should be reading right now. But, you know, like when you're working, you don't have that. So working is amazing. I'll never get people who just want to be in school all the time. I just don't get it. But you know why they do that? It's not called unemployment when you're paying tuition. And you meet those people, and especially at Harvard, because people are just so rich. You meet a lot of professional students, and it's just pathetic, honestly. Workload in grad school, I didn't think was that bad compared to Barnard, because Barnard was so rigorous. What else am I going to go through? Okay, more about money. Again, take out what you need. Like, don't take, a lot of people actually, I was surprised, like, intelligent, smart people are taking out a lot of loans for really dumb reasons. Don't be about that life, because it will come back to bite you. Like, I'm paying $14.40. What are they paying? One girl I found out is paying $22. I was like, what? Like, $22? Like, that's out of control. That was like, that's more than like what I got paid at the hospital, and that's like your student loan payment. A good way to keep track of your spending is mint.com. You guys some of you probably already use that, but that's really helpful. It can make a budget for you, and I thought that like budgets for me would be really hard, and that I would have a hard time like sticking to it. But I thought it was actually really helpful. If you want, it can send you little texts. And the little text will say, hey, you know, like you're approaching your budget or you're over it. And I just find it helpful because then I know that like the more I go over budget, then there's like less money for me to spend on something else, right? There's actually a class I took at Barnard, like when I was here, the Athena leadership thing was like it was very new, but I took a class here on personal finance that was really helpful. And there's a book that they suggest in that class called On My Own 2 Feet. I think if you take it during winter session, they actually give you the book for free, so that's nice. I had to buy it, but it was fun. It's not that expensive. Susan Norman's Money Book for the Young Fabulous and Rich is really helpful. Know your credit score. You're going to need to know that when you look for an apartment in New York. These are all things that like I didn't even think about until I graduated, and it was fine, but like it would have been better, right, if I had been like thinking about it beforehand. Did I work during graduate school? I did. I also worked during Barnard. I worked 3 jobs at Barnard, and I worked 3 jobs in grad school. And I was not about that loan life. It was really hard, and I don't suggest it. Can we get 1 minute? Yeah.
No, it's 20 degrees.
Oh, it is? Oh, I'm so sorry.
Isn't it?
No, I just want to ask you, I'll wait till after you do this, because I'm going to ask you a question on maybe something.
Okay. So, yep, you can also find internships that will pay you on campus. I think that Tova made a really good comment about how people always want graduate students. That's very accurate. Yes, I think another thing Matt said that I thought was really good was he said that medical school is not where you go if you want to be a leader in healthcare, and that's very accurate, and that's because you can't change the system if you're in it, right? And when you are complicit in a system, you can't be the change maker because you're already benefiting from that system. And that's not any sort of negative comment on physicians. Like, physicians are awesome, they save our lives. But I think that that's true of like a politician, right? Like, a politician can't change a system if they are complicit in it. And I think that that's something I learned, especially in public health school, was that it really requires people on the outside to put pressure on something to make it change. And I guess just classes I wish I'd taken in college for my career. I wish I'd taken econ. I didn't because I was so focused on hard sciences. I wish I'd taken sociology. That's so helpful if you're going to try to understand people and health systems and like social determinants of health. And social determinants of health are exactly what it sounds like. There's so many things. Health is only 50% like what like your genome says, right? 50% is like your environment. If you have asthma, is it because you have the gene for asthma? Maybe. Maybe because you live by a bus depot and it's spewing black sludge into the air. There's a lot of things that go into our health, and how we structure that system is really important. I wish I'd taken a women's studies class. Women are such a focus in healthcare because they're an anomaly in so many different ways. And unfortunately, our system is incredibly patriarchal. And doesn't want to acknowledge a lot of those issues. I wish that I had a better understanding of that going in, and I mean, I got a lot of that in graduate school, and coming from women's college, I was light years ahead of so many people. I was appalled how many people like went to college and didn't know some of the things I learned. And then I think just like the last thing, I think just to go into like what I do with my day-to-day life, I'm a healthcare consultant. I just started in September, so I've only been around for a few weeks. But essentially, like, I think some of you guys are familiar with consulting. I wasn't. I wish I was more aware of it when I was going to undergrad. But essentially, a consultant, especially a strategy consultant, is someone who helps a business with a problem. So for instance, a client I may have maybe like a health insurance company. And this may not be applicable in the future, but as of right now, with the Affordable Care Act, the way insurance companies used to make money was that, you know, you pay them a little bit every month so that in case you get sick, then they pay for you to go to the doctor, right? And then they make a lot of money by not paying for really sick people. Because if someone is going to be really sick and going to need to go to the doctor, you don't want them because they're going to be expensive. You want a lot of like healthy people that are never going to go to the doctor because then you can keep their premiums. But now they can't do that. They can't do that anymore, and so there's a lot of sick people flooding this market, causing premiums to go up. So like one client could be a health insurance company saying, what do we do? There are all these really sick people who don't have access to good health care. They're vulnerable groups, and they don't understand how the system works, and they keep going to the emergency room, which is really expensive, and that's causing us to raise our premiums. How do we fix this problem? So a healthcare strategist may come in and say, you need population health solutions. You need to figure out a way to help people see their physicians more often, get access, go to the doctor before they need to, before the ER even happens. And that's a problem that I may solve. So my job is every Monday, I fly to my client, which could be anywhere in the world. I'm there until Thursday evening, and then like Thursday late afternoon, evening, I fly back home to New York. Friday, I may go to the office, or I may like work from home, depending on like what I feel like doing. And then generally weekends are free. Sometimes I work weekends. And when you are a well-compensated person, you are expected to. My first project was really intense. My first day there, I was like already in meetings. My second day, we had a 2 a.m. night. My third day, we had a 6 a.m. night. That is not super normal, but it's not abnormal. Like, sometimes clients feel like they're paying you a lot, so you do what they say. And you do, because they are paying you. And then other times, like right now, I'm on a really chill project. I just work from home. I may go to the office if I want to, and I just do my work, and then I'm done by like 5 or 6. So then that's fine, right? It just depends on your client. And generally, when you work for a firm like I do, if it's a high-value client, which means you're getting paid a lot of money, there's a lot of pressure on you to get to deliver whatever the client needs. And so a lot of people don't stay in consulting for a long time because, as you can imagine, the travel is just, it's impossible, right? Like, I don't have kids, so I can do it for right now. But generally, women, when they get pregnant, leave the field because it's just, first of all, you can't fly when you're certain weeks pregnant. Second of all, you can't be leaving your child. A lot of women don't want to do that. Sometimes at some consulting firms, when you reach a certain level, you can be more of a relationship partner or a lead, and you can stay in whatever city you work in, and just there's shifts that way. It really depends on your firm. I'm not far enough in my career to know what that looks like. I've heard about such things. But in general, there aren't a lot of women past a certain level. There aren't a lot of female partners. And that's okay with me. I'm not trying to be here forever, which is super common in consulting. Like in consulting, I think it's one field where in your interview, you can say what you actually want to do because they don't expect you to stay. In my interview, I flat out said, I want to run Care USA or I want to run Red Cross. And the partner was like, that sounds great. We're going to give you great skills to do that. And I'm getting great skills on finance and operations and strategy. And I did this job because it basically trains you how to be a chief executive. And it's also, you get to skip a step because my goal is to do this for a few years, hopefully get hired by a client, if at the very least in the senior vice president role, if not C-suite, and then within a few years from that, be chief executive. So I think I'm done with my spiel. Are there any questions?
How did you decide to work at PwC specifically? Were they recruiting from your master's program, and how do you feel about the company?
Okay, so the question was, how did I decide to work for PwC specifically? First of all, my firm within PwC is called Strategy and we're the strategy consulting practice of PricewaterhouseCoopers. We used to be called Booz & Company up until 2 years ago. So we were our own independent strategy consulting firm that got acquired by Pricewaterhouse. And I always admired Booz & Company. They, when I was here, recruited at Columbia Barnard. Consulting is a really hard job, and if you don't have good people behind you, you're not going to survive. So it's really common for people to leave after a year or 2 years and then just bounce because it's hard if you're working the kind of hours we work if you don't like people you're working with or the kind of job the kind of work you're doing. So I knew that Booz & Company was doing good work. I had friends from here who had worked for them and they really liked it. They seemed to be staying in the field longer than some other people. And then I saw Booz & Company's name on Harvard's employment data. And Harvard is the only school of public health where my firm recruits. And so that made this decision really easy. And so they were my first choice firm when I entered. And so I told them that in my interview. I was like, this is where I want to work. I came to Harvard because I want to work here.
And they knew that you want to work in specifically healthcare consulting, not anything else.
Yes, and also that's what my degree is in, so that makes sense. Also, the firm hires from our program because generally, when you do my level of consulting, everyone has an MBA, and so that's another path you could go down. You could learn about healthcare in the MBA setting. I considered that, and then I thought that I just really wanted that deep dive in healthcare, and when I looked at MBA programs, they just weren't the same level of detail in healthcare. It was a lot of cursory knowledge of business, and then you take 3 electives, and that wasn't good enough for me. And so why they come to my school, why they look at my program is because my program is, I think unlike other public health programs, Harvard's program is modeled after the business school, and so we follow business school curriculum, only it's in healthcare. So we take finance in healthcare, we take strategy in healthcare, and a lot of other programs I think are similar. And then our second year of our program, we typically go to class at the business school or the public policy school. And so for me, that was the perfect fit because it was all of these hard skills, but they were in healthcare. And so the firm really wanted to be able, I think what happens in a lot of consulting is that you bring on a lot of people who are young who don't necessarily know the industry, which is fine because they're young and they just got out of a master's program, but that sometimes irritates clients who are thinking, I'm paying you so much, and you bring me this person who doesn't even know how insurance works, you bring me this person who doesn't even know how hospitals work. So clients like people like me, because I can come in and I've worked in a hospital, I've worked in insurance, I've worked in literally every aspect of healthcare. I did that on purpose so that I can get a job anywhere. And anyone that mentions anything in healthcare, I have at least a cursory knowledge of it.
You mentioned that your healthcare consultant career right now implement a lot of strategizing and also finance. How do you see your strong background in science actually help your work right now? Do you think strong background in science is a necessity or a compliment?
So I have a love-hate relationship with my background in science. One is that it makes me think analytically, which is not always good in business because business people don't think analytically. Like they think they do, but they make a lot of assumptions. They just make things up, which when you come from a background, like I worked in like neuroscience, like things were so specific. Like, I mean, I remember one time we were looking at something in the brain and I was saying, oh, like, look at all these activated neural centers. Like, that means that the mouse must have liked something more. And my supervisor was like, no, we can't assume how the mouse felt. Like, all we can say is that the neural centers are activated. Like, things are so specific. So, like, when you go into business, people will just say things like, yeah, you know, projections for revenues next year look amazing. And I'm like, well, how do you know how next year's gonna look? And do you, well, I'll say, okay, well, do you have contracts already ready? Because, you know, that's like an idea, right? Like, if you already signed contracts, okay, like, that's like real money. They go, oh no, we took last year's numbers out of 15%. Well, where the hell did that come from? So, like, that's an issue I have personally. Second of all, I will say with science, I think, this is like my personal thing, but like I think that there's a lot of hullabaloo right now about STEM. And I think that when it comes to hard science, a lot of employers actually like don't really know what to do with you if you just did basic science. Like engineers, they put in engineering roles. A lot of basic scientists go on to become doctors or researchers, but like if you're like someone who did basic science and you're just trying to like be a professional, they know that you're smart and that's an asset, but you have a hard time explaining to them how that's useful to them, and they have a hard time understanding how that's useful to them as well. And there's obviously, like I got around that, you can get around that, but I think this is also like why people do econ, because it's just, majors like that just tell you what to say in interviews, and they give you a path. And like biochem, neuro, they're not doing that for you. And so you have to figure it out on your own. So, I mean, it taught me how to be detail-oriented, which is a blessing and a curse, but it doesn't necessarily give you what an employer needs. You need to like sit down on your own and like be creative with like what you're gonna say in an interview. So like what I say in an interview is like, I'm really smart, I did this, most people don't do this, and because I did this and I was a political science major, can you imagine what I would do for you? Anybody else?
I just wanted to make those captions when I came in here, say something I would read like credit.
I'm sorry?
Credit.
Credit?
Yeah, did you say something about credit scores that you need to fix?
Yeah, well, what I was saying about credit scores is that you just need to know your credit scores. I didn't know my credit score when I was in college. It turned out to be such a big deal because they got my credit mixed up with someone else's. And so I had a really low credit score when I came out of college. So I got like rejected from all these apartments, and I was like, I didn't have a credit card. Like, why do people hate me? And so it's something you should check on. You can get your credit score. A lot of like credit cards will now give it to you for free. So like if you have American Express, you get like your free FICO score every month. And there's like a whole thing behind like your real credit score, which is your FICO score, and there are a couple of other like ones that are like fake or simulated ones. But I say that to say, you can find it out for free usually, your credit score. Just know it, and if it's low, just like make sure nothing that wasn't you was on there. I had things in my credit score from like 1992, which like logically I could not have taken out a Macy's card when I was 2 years old. So like, you know, these are things you just have to figure out. Your credit history is also really important. And you can like Google, I was self-taught all of this. So it's like my parents had no idea what was going on because they were immigrants. You can figure all this out. I think the resources I gave you, like On My Own 2 Feet's a good book. Susie Orman's Money Book for the Young 5 Books and Broke is also really good. But just make sure that you know this information, because like when you're looking for an apartment at the end of the year, just being able to say that my credit score is X is like so helpful to a potential like landlord.
You know where you get that from?
How you can fix it. So if anything on there is incorrect, that is actually illegal. So if anything on your credit report is not something that you did, then you can usually go to like, say there's 3 credit reporting agencies, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. You can usually go to their website and there's like a button for called like credit disputes. You can file it through there. I think it's also a good idea to send like an official letter. So I sent an official letter saying like XYZ points on my credit report are incorrect. They are clearly not logically belonging to me, and like there's like that's not linked to my social security numbers. It's all incorrect. You need to take it off within 30 days, or else I'm going to have to take you to court. And then they immediately take it off because they don't want you to do that. I didn't have a lawyer, but like, you know, just you can generally send that in. I mean, if it was you and you messed up, then you gotta figure that out.
But you can fix
Yeah, you can fix that.
Rashi?
I was wondering, what was the personal finance class you took?
It was through the like Athena. It wasn't like a class. It was through the Athena Leadership Program. I think it's run by like Catherine Colbert or something.
Was it
But
how to keep your time in your 20s?
no, it was called something like Personal Finance 101. I mean, they probably have changed the names in the last 4 years, but there's definitely one on personal finance. When I was here, there was like a package of Athena leadership classes that was targeted towards seniors, part of what we then called the senior experience. I don't know if they still call it that now. But there was a package of courses called like senior experience courses that Barnard suggested that you take before you leave, and I took it, and it was really helpful. That's where I found out about Mint.com. That's where I found out about like the 50-30-20 rule, which the 50% of your expenses should be for essentials, 20% should be for savings, 30% should be for like other stuff. Because I had just never, I made money in college, but I was like living like hand to mouth, so everything I made was just like, I just spent to buy like food or something. So it never occurred to me how to be more structured, but just learn it now, because there are people that are older than you, like especially once you take out debt, that's not the time to learn about how to manage your money. It's too late, like learn about it now.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and then the room is booked by someone else, so.
So given your long-term goal of running an organization like Care USA, how do you, on a day-to-day basis, feel about working in healthcare consulting and from that very business perspective?
I feel good about it because one, it's a really hard job to get. It's really competitive. I think under like 3% of applicants get the job I get, so I'm like so blessed every day to have this job. Second of all, I think that in healthcare, we have this tendency to give physicians positions of leadership, and I think that if anything American history has taught us is that that's not always the best person for a leadership role. Physicians are awesome and they know how to take care of patients, but they're not trained with how to balance a budget, and they're not trained with how patient operations should work. They don't know what strategy is. So having this basically all that consulting is going into an ambiguous problem and putting a structure on it and solving it. Like I'm a problem solver every single day. So I can solve how an insurance company handles a large group of vulnerable people that don't have health care. If I can solve how a emergency, actually I went to Turkey in January and I saw an overcrowded emergency room in Izmir, Turkey, and within 3 weeks we had it running significantly better. If I can do that, then I think I'm significantly more prepared to handle issues of global poverty and global health access.
I want to thank all our speakers now.